We're going to take a quick look at the DBS-210 3PCC, what information we need to collect from the unit. So one of the first things we want to take a look at, I am logged in, by the way, as administrator. So one of the first things we want to take a look at is what firmware does the unit itself have. So currently, if we take a look at the firmware here, so this section right here, firmware version, it is listed as 5.0, and I'll actually repeat here, 5-00-01-03-19. So as the recording of this video, this is the latest version of firmware offered for this platform. Then we're going to go ahead and take a look at the handsets that we actually have registered. Just take a look at the current status. Currently I only have one that's actually online. And you're going to notice the firmware on the 6825 DECT handset is also a 5-00-1. The last digits may vary as different firmware builds are created for the different products within the family set, but the key thing is we want to make sure we're in par as far as the major version, the 5-00-1. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and take a look at the SIP log. So basically what we would want to typically do here is export this SIP log. So I'll go ahead and export to capture that. So the focus of this video is really what information you should consider capturing if you're needing to troubleshoot something related to the DBS-210 or the DBS-110 and the DECT phones, example like the 6825 like I have here. So we've verified that both the base station and a handset have the latest firmware, the 5.0.1 firmware. And now we're collecting the SIP debug information. So we hit export. Next thing is going to be, let me actually go down a little bit. Next thing is going to be the syslog. And then what we want to do here is we want to go ahead and export the syslog. Okay, so we got that also. Next thing is we want to capture the configuration. So we're going to export that also. Okay, we got that. Diagnostics. And once we're under diagnostics, we want to actually go to the logging section. And then in the logging section, we want to make sure that the RSX internal tracing is enabled. Typically by default this is disabled. And then also where it says PCAP internal tracing, we want to make sure all four of these are enabled. So the trace packets to and from this base station except audio, trace audio packets to and from this base station, trace received broadcast packets, trace received IPv4 multicast packets. The rest of this we're going to leave as is. We're not going to change anything. And then we want to go ahead and, in your case, if this is disabled and these settings are not as is, you'd want to save. In my case, I've already done it from past. And then we want to go ahead and download the traces. So if your deployment is a multi-cell deployment where you have multiple base stations, you want to do all base stations, or one base station, then current base station. So I'm going to do all base stations. I only have one online right now, but this is a multi-base station config I have here. So this will take a few moments. And I'm just going to call this a test trace. And it's basically bundled all the information and just download into a zip. You'd obviously want to label it whatever the issue that you're trying to locate. Also, you would probably want to document the date and time of the issue and make sure the base station, I mean, you can check this on the phone to make sure everything is in time synchronization. The idea is when going back and looking at the time segment when the issue occurred, like right when the issue occurred and maybe 30 seconds or a few minutes before the issue occurred, you want to basically be able to focus in on that segment of logging, because otherwise the logs may be quite large and it can take a lot of time and effort. So always make sure when the issue occurs, document the timestamp, the date and time, also if there's any type of time zone offset. So those are like the main things we want to capture: the SIP debug, syslog, settings, which is the config, and the all BS traces, or it can be just the current base station traces. Other than that, we can look at some generic statistics here. So this will actually give us an idea as far as the DECT statistics. This, by the way, is not using Wi-Fi technology. So this is using DECT technology for North America. It's based upon the 1920 to 1930 megahertz RF band, or frequency band, if you will, spectrum. In this situation, I don't have too much going on. I have one base station that's turned on. I have one DECT phone that's turned on, so that's a base station 210, and then it's a DECT 6825. This I am using this actually in a residential environment, but it is a consideration. If this is being used in an industrial environment, you may want to take a look at these statistics and see if there's any other interferers within the vicinity, other equipment that might be using the DECT RF frequency. Okay, we'll look at statistics now. And by the way, the screen we're just on, you may want to take some screenshots of the screen as far as the generic statistics. If there's something of question here, you could just take screenshots of this, or maybe do a screen capture of it, and then over time kind of do a comparative analysis when things are working correctly and there's no issues, and then also taking screenshots of this information when issues do develop. We'll go into statistics. I've not actually made any calls recent times, so there's probably going to be very minimal information. But in any case, this is something, once you're under statistics here, you can do an export, and then that's going to export the statistics. And then you can also take a look if there's any type of issues that the end user using this is reporting. So it has a count of calls, drop calls, emergency calls, calls dropped to emergency calls rejected, no response, duration, active, maximum, the codecs that are used, handover, attempt successful, handover, attempt aborted, audio not detected. So some really good statistics to take a look at. Repeaters, if you're using any repeaters. And then we'll go ahead and just wrap this up on the home status page here. So this was just kind of a high-level overview of some of the information that we want to capture from the DBS-210 base station. The same would apply if we're using the DBS-110 base station. As we go back here, we've basically grabbed the SIP log, we've grabbed the syslog, we've grabbed the configuration, the diagnostics, generic statistics, and that should be good enough as far as from a troubleshooting standpoint to take a look at potentially what is occurring. I typically like to baseline systems if possible before any issues develop. So if this is something that you're deploying new and you have access, admin access to the unit, which you may not. As I mentioned earlier, some services like WebEx calling, when you onboard the device, it does get locked by machine-generated passwords, so you may not be able to baseline it. I do have another video I created where you can actually use the handset itself, the DECT 6825 handset. There's a mode where you can actually do a site survey. It'll actually give you the negative dBm level of the RF energy between the actual handset and the base station as you walk around, so that's also useful. Other statistics to grab if you are doing actual troubleshooting beyond just what we looked at here is most of these units tend to be deployed with managed switches. They can be small business, they can be enterprise switches, and if the switch is a managed switch, typically what I recommend is go ahead and do a show logging on a switch and go ahead and take a look at the information from the show logging output and see if there's any information of the switch complaining about, or any ports up and down, or any other type of errors that the switch is indicating the logs if you're troubleshooting. The other one also is performing some Wireshark captures on the switch port where the DBS210 lives on. Again, depending on what type of item you're troubleshooting, you can start off with a quick 10-second Wireshark capture, do a port mirror. Source port is where the actual DBS210 plugs into the switch, and then destination port would be a notebook, and then run it and take a look to see if there's any elevated levels of ARPs, any elevated levels of broadcast, any elevated levels of multicast. Again, these are just generic concepts. If you're troubleshooting something specific like IP address issues, issues of the traffic not being able to be routed, from the DBS210 to wherever it's trying to get to, obviously at that point you'd be looking at different layers of the OSI stack from a layer 3 routing standpoint. If there's ACL issues, registration issues, DNS issues, NTP issues, etc., etc. But this should give you a pretty good idea of the elements of items you should collect and use for analysis in your troubleshooting efforts. In any case, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully this helps you with your DBS210, DBS110, and DECT phone projects. Thank you.